And now we turn to the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, Mrs. Lourdes Aranda. It's actually now December. They're 6-7 months ahead to the next summit of the G20. We are very grateful to have your view also of the relationship between the G8 and the G20, which Dr. Ilse Kong just touched on, and also any reactions you have to Dr. Frankel's view on the world economy.
Thank you very much, Kemal, and thank you very much, Thierry de Montbrial, for having me here. For Mexico, this is a very good opportunity not to only speak about the next summit, but also to express how we see the G20 in general terms. And I think the context of discussion on global governance is it's the best moment to talk about G8, G20, and how is the world governing itself right now. I think the ideas and proposals that have raised not only today but yesterday are very useful, and I will take them as a feedback for our presidency. I think there are some issues we have to insist upon, and Lisa Kong was very clear on it, that the G20 is not an organization, it's not a summit in itself, it's a mechanism, it's a process. So it's a new cooperation paradigm which will be in certain evolution as a ways of increasing multilateral cooperation. The G20 is on the making. There's no thing like the G20 is like this or the G20 is like that. It's really a very young, well, I wouldn't say mechanism, but something of a very young way of organizing the leaders. I do believe that as the G8 was established, the G20 was also established at the leaders level as a response to a specific economic crisis which had really unprecedented consequences for the world economy. And its aim is to provide political consensus in the management of global challenges imposed by an increasingly interconnected world. So this is, I think, the way that the summit successfully managed the crisis in 2008 and in 2009. Well, that's why it turned to be the premier forum on international economic cooperation. Well, I do believe we have the title, but now we have to show why we are this premier forum, and we can still be. I think ideally the G20 should phase out the G8 and keep prevalence over global and economic financial issues. And I think this will be also a process in which everybody is completely clear that, and I think Mr. Frankel was very clear on the numbers, that the G8 is not at the moment, or maybe in 20 years it has lost the power it had over the world economic output, and that now there are other countries which are really a competition to this group. And sorry, maybe the word is not competition, but that they have as much capacity to influence on global affairs as the G8 countries. So I think eventually the G20 will take over, and that will be the informal mechanism that should be taken into account in order to try to prevent and solve this crisis. But I do believe that in order to preserve the G20 relevance and credibility, the group must learn from those practices and mistakes that undermine the efficacy and credibility of the G8. And Thierry, in his introduction speech yesterday, spoke about the lack of credibility well, he mentioned the G8 and the G20. I hope that the G20 will still have some credibility, and we will be working towards it. At least some of the countries are very interested in it. I think that a first lesson is related to the agenda management, the effective follow-up and delivery that the G20 has. Unlike the G8, the G20 must not overburden its agenda. The G20 has to focus on delivering its commitments, and that led to its creation during the economic crisis in 2008. So we have agreed on many, many issues, but we have to really review how we are following up on these issues and how it will change the global economy. I do believe that the recurrence of the crisis from 2008 to now again in 2011, it might be also because we didn't put attention to some of the commitments we had, and we didn't put all the energy we had agreed to put on solving these issues. And I do believe we have to avoid, the G20 needs to avoid duplication or unnecessary proliferation of issues in its agenda. The assumption that summits should only deal with global issues where G20 leaders, we should only put into the summits those issues in which the leaders can bring value added. Otherwise, we just overburden the agenda, and that's where the criticism that the G20 is not solving the issues comes to the floor. And I also think there's a mistaken view that a 1.5-day agenda for the summit will solve all the problems of the world economy. That's not true. The G20 gives us guidelines that we will work over the year. And I think that's the moment where you ask about the IMF. It's clear that we have to work with the IMF, not only the IMF. The establishment of the FSB, it's also one of the great successes of the G20. And I think that's the way we have to work with the specialized financial agencies, and they are the ones who, give us the specific and technical guidance for the G20 to keep working. And I do believe if it's not formal, there's a very, very close working relationship with the IMF, with the World Bank, and with the FSB, with the OECD, and in the case where we have to deal with some more specific subjects with the OECD or the WTO or the ILO. But really the core group which with the G20 works is IMF, World Bank, and the FSB. I want to raise also the issue of the Troika and the Secretariat. I do believe the Troika, it's an excellent option to keep a greater institutional memory and continuity. But so far, I have to accept that the Troika has not yet worked as we wanted it to do. So we hope that right now, under the Mexican presidency, between France, Mexico, and Russia, we can work together. And it's in a certain way, try to pressure all countries to follow up on our previous commitments. I don't think the G20 is ready for a secretariat. All of us who work with or close with international organizations, we know that secretariats tend to have a life of their own. And then sometimes we forget the objective of the organization or the mechanism, and then we are just thinking on how we make the mechanism work, and not so much about its objectives. So far, at least the Mexicans' preference is to keep a troika, and the idea of having secondments from different countries could be also very useful. In the case of Mexico, we are having secondments from countries who have previously held summits like London, like Canada, and that will have like Australia, and that's useful to keep a more integrated presidency each year. And I think the second lesson related to how the G8 used to work is the outreach. We have to have effective outreach. If the G20 wants to evade criticism related to its representativeness, to the kind of criticisms that G8 face, it needs to redouble its efforts to strengthen its engagement with all relevant groups. And I do believe that having this kind of meetings, like with think tanks, with academic institutions, with NGOs, with other international organizations, and not only the presidency, but all members of the G20 can be a way of transparencing our working methods and trying to recover all what is being discussed in other forums that could be helpful for the G20. So we will, Mexico will work on it. And just very briefly, I would like to touch upon the Mexican presidency, and I hope afterwards, during the question and period session, I can go back again to Mexican priorities. I would just like to point out that after Korea, the first emerging economy to hold the G20, well, it's a big challenge to Mexico because we know Korea took the presidency when we were out of the crisis mode. We were more on a regular mode, and putting on the table of the G20 some very important issues like development and infrastructure, which was very important for the G20. And now Mexico will be the first Latin American country that will be during the G20. And as Professor Frenkel said, well, fortunately, Latin America is going right now to a period of prosperity. We hope we can remain that way even with these same circumstances. But I think that gives us some authority to talk about how Latin America faced in the past some of the crises that Europe is facing right now. It took us a lot of courage and a lot of discipline at the time. And I do believe we have some lessons that we can help to share what happened in Latin America many years ago. Well, Mexico, President Calderon has stated that the priorities will be how to recover economic stability. I think it's crucial, economic growth and the issue of recovering employment and economic growth is one of the most important. The financial regulations, how we can, through the IMF's role, prevent future crises and clarify the role of the G20 and this IMF and FSB in the current crisis. And that we have really to strengthen these kind of organizations. Secondly, it's sustainable development. President Calderon has been very, has pointed out in a very clear way that we have to promote green growth, and that recovery it's not necessarily have to be forgotten until we recover. I mean, green growth doesn't have to be separated from economic recovery. We have to work together. And the establishment of the Green Fund and the implementation of programs to simultaneously alleviate poverty and reduce deforestation will be clear. The issue of food security will be also crucial during Mexican presidency. But I do believe I have taken much more time than what I was allocated, so I will wait until the question and answer session to go in further deep into Mexican priorities.
Thank you, Lourdes. Just one question. Has it already been decided who will be the special guests at the Leaders G20? Because there are always, 4 or 5 special guests. Maybe it's not yet decided, but...
It's not yet decided because, as you know, it should be, normally it's the head of the African Union at the moment, and it's going to be elected in January. So we will wait until January to make the formal invitations to the 5 countries. Of course, you know that Spain is a permanent guest. And so we still have 4 countries which we will be inviting.